I buried my father on a cold Thursday morning. By Friday, I had already started destroying my brother's life. Before you judge me, understand this. Some people do not learn when you speak to them. Some do not learn when life humbles them. My brother Jack was the kind who only learns when everything he loves is taken away. And my father, God rest his soul, knew that too. He left me the documents. He left me the authority. He left me the final weapon. So when Jack arrived smiling, ready to collect the inheritance he believed he deserved, he had no idea I was already sharpening the blade meant for him. This is not a story about justice. This is not about forgiveness. This is a story about revenge. My revenge. Delivered with precision. Delivered with patience. Delivered exactly the way my father designed it. And I made sure Jack felt every second of it. The day after the funeral, I sat alone at my kitchen table with the wooden box my father left only for me. It was small, old, and locked with a key tied to a string in his handwriting. My hands trembled as I untied it. Inside the box was not jewelry, not letters of comfort, not photographs of the past. Inside were numbers, dates, names, debt contracts, receipts, loan agreements, bank transfers, all in my father's handwriting. Every lie Jack ever told, every loan he promised to repay, every bailout, every theft, every business he ruined, every time he sold something of my father's and pocketed the money for himself. Line after line, page after page, decade after decade. My father had documented everything. Every wound, every betrayal, every scar Jack carved into this family. And on the very top was a single note. Short, sharp, final. Use this. End it. My breath caught in my throat. My father did not simply want me to know the truth. He wanted me to act on it. I sat there for almost an hour, staring at the evidence. The rain outside tapped against the window as if whispering a warning. I could hear the echo of my father's voice in my mind. Precise. Unshakable. He had spent years preparing this. Quietly. Carefully. Waiting for the exact moment when Jack could no longer twist the truth. Waiting for the moment when I could finish what he started. I felt something ignite in my chest. Not rage. Rage burns too bright. Too fast. This was colder. Deeper. Something like clarity. All my life, Jack had been the storm. I had been the one patching the roof, cleaning the floor, protecting the family from the mess he left behind. But in this moment, I understood something my father had always known but never admitted. Jack was never going to change. So we had to change him. The first step was simple. Call the notary. Set the will reading. Wait for Jack to arrive. And let the trap close around him. The will reading took place in a quiet office with beige walls and heavy silence. My sisters sat on either side of me. My mother clutched a handkerchief even though her tears had already dried. The notary cleared his throat, the papers trembling slightly in his hand. Then Jack arrived. He walked in wearing a smug smile, a new watch, and an attitude that made my stomach turn. The same man who barely visited our father in his final months now strutted in, as if he were the rightful king returning to claim his throne. He hugged no one, offered no condolences, sat down and immediately asked, "How much are we getting?" I watched him, studied him, measured him. He had no idea. Not yet. The notary began reading the will. Each of us received a generous share. Life-changing. My mother cried softly. My sisters held hands. Then the notary reached the final section. Jack's portion. His smile widened. He leaned back, ready to enjoy what he assumed was his reward. That was when the notary paused, adjusted his glasses, and said the words that tasted sweeter than anything I had heard in years. Jack's inheritance shall be disbursed only after all documented debts owed to the estate have been fully repaid. Jack blinked, confused, then irritated. What debts? I opened the wooden box. I slid the documents across the table. The notary looked through them first, his eyes widening slightly at the detail, the signatures, the undeniable truth written on every line. He cleared his throat again and said carefully, "These debts are legitimate, legally binding, fully enforceable." Jack snatched a handful of papers and skimmed through them with an expression of disbelief and anger. He looked from the documents to me, then back again, his face twisting. This is lies. This is fraud. Father never kept records like this. I met his eyes steadily. He did. He kept everything. Jack threw the papers onto the table, but the sound was weak compared to the storm brewing behind his eyes. How much do I owe then? The notary read the total aloud. Jack's face drained of color. It was more than his entire inheritance. Much more. If these debts stand, Jack said slowly, voice cracking, then I get nothing. I leaned forward, my voice low and calm. Correct. For the first time in his life, Jack realized the world did not bend for him. Jack stood so abruptly that his chair scraped across the floor. He pointed at me with a trembling hand, breathing hard. You did this. You planned this. I stood too, but slowly. Deliberately. No. Father planned this. I am simply honoring it. Jack stepped closer. His jaw clenched. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be. The child who got away with everything. The boy my father protected so fiercely that it destroyed him. But that boy no longer mattered. Only the man he had become. And the debt he had earned. The notary cleared his throat again. His voice formal. Unshakable. Unless all debts are settled, you are not eligible to receive your portion of the estate. Jack's shoulders sagged. He looked like he had been hollowed out. Stripped of the arrogance he wrapped himself in like armor. He whispered one word. Please. I shook my head. Not this time, Jack. Not ever again. For a long moment no one spoke. The room held its breath. My sisters stared at the table. My mother stared at her hands. The notary stared at the documents. And Jack stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. He had always seen me as the soft one. The responsible sister. The one who stayed quiet, cleaned up, forgave, and moved on. He never imagined I would be the one standing between him and the free money he believed he deserved. He tried one more time. Anna, we are family. You cannot do this. My voice did not shake. Family is exactly why I am doing this. He laughed bitterly. Father would never have wanted this. I reached into the box and took out the last envelope. The one with Jack's name on it. My father's handwriting across the front. He did, I said quietly. He wrote you a letter. Jack stared at it like it was a weapon. In a way it was. He snatched it from my hand and stormed out without another word. The door closed behind him with a hollow sound. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not joy. Not triumph. Relief. Heavy and terrifying. The trap had closed. And I was the one who pulled the rope. After the will reading, my sisters and I walked home together in silence. The sky was gray. The air smelled like rain and old stone. Every step felt strange. Light and heavy at the same time. One of my sisters finally spoke. Do you think we did the right thing? I stopped walking and turned to face her. No. We did not do the right thing. We did the necessary thing. There is a difference. The right thing would have been our father stopping Jack when he still had the chance. Setting boundaries. Refusing to fund his disasters. Refusing to cover his crimes. The right thing would have been balance. But we did not get that. We got a lifetime of enabling. And this was the consequence. We reached my house. My husband was waiting inside, his face tight with worry. When I told him what happened, he let out a long breath and sat down hard on the chair. So it is done, he said. No. Ian Shuara. It has only just begun. Because forcing Jack to face his debts was only one part of my father's plan. To understand the rest, you have to see how we got here. You have to see the damage that came before the revenge. I will tell you the truth from the beginning. Not because I enjoy reliving it, but because you cannot understand the weight of this revenge without understanding the weight of what came before. My father, Hank, was not a cruel man. He was strong, disciplined, fair. He built his company from nothing. Luxury textiles, clothing, towels, bathrobes. He treated his employees well, paid them properly, made sure they could feed their families. At home, he believed in equal opportunities. We, his daughters, went to school when other girls were told to stay home. He paid for our driving lessons when most people in town still used bicycles. We had a car, a radio, even a television. People admired our family. For years, he treated us with the same strict love, the same expectations. We shared chores. We shared responsibility. We respected him. We trusted him. Then Jack was born, my father's first and only son, and it was as if someone had flipped a switch inside him. From the moment my brother opened his eyes, my father was obsessed. He held Jack like he was made of gold. He paraded him around town. This is my son, my heir, my future. We laughed at first. We loved the baby too. We spoiled him. We played with him. We carried him on our backs. We were proud to have a little brother. But as he grew, the rules began to bend, then warp, then break. If we came home late, we were scolded. If Jack came home late, my father chuckled and said, "The boy is enjoying life." If we raised our voice, we were punished. If Jack shouted, my father said he had spirit. If we made a mistake, we had to fix it. If Jack made a mistake, someone else fixed it for him. My mother tried to steady things. She reminded my father that children need boundaries, not worship. He brushed her off. "Jack is a boy," he would say. "He will grow out of it." But he never did. The small misbehaviors became bigger. Lies. Stolen pocket money. Broken windows blamed on other kids. Skipping homework. Skipping school. Every warning was dismissed. And every time my father looked the other way, something inside Jack rotted a little more. By his teenage years, the problems were no longer small. He was expelled from his first school for fighting. The principal called my parents in and described how Jack had punched another student and laughed. My father said, "Boys fight. It is normal." He was expelled from his second school for shoplifting. They found items stuffed in his bag. Cigarettes. A watch. A wallet. My father said the store owner was exaggerating. He was caught joyriding a neighbor's car. He did not even have a license. The police brought him home. My mother cried. My father shook the officer's hand, thanked him, and then turned around and told Jack, "Be more careful next time. More careful. Not stop. Not change. Be more careful." That was the message Jack grew up on. We, his sisters, learned a different message. You are responsible. He is forgiven. We picked up after him, paid off small debts, covered for him when creditors called, tried to talk sense into him. Sometimes late at night, I would sit with him at the kitchen table and beg him, "Jack, you are ruining your life. Father will not always be here to fix everything." He would smile that lazy smile and say, "He always has been. He always will be." He truly believed it. And for a very long time, he was right. When Jack turned 18, my father did what he believed would save him. He brought him into the company. I remember that morning with painful clarity. My father stood tall, proud, almost glowing as he walked Jack through the factory floor. The sewing machines hummed. Rolls of fabric lined the walls. Steam rose from the irons like warm breath. It was everything my father loved in one building. He placed a hand on Jack's shoulder and said, "One day, this will be yours." I swallowed hard. My sisters exchanged silent looks. Because we worked there too. We bled for that place. We held it together. But in my father's eyes, Jack was the future. We were footnotes. Still, I gave my brother a chance. I told myself destiny can change a person. Responsibility can shape a boy into a man. And for a brief moment, it looked like it might. Jack arrived early. He swept the floors, helped the seamstresses, carried heavy fabric bolts without complaint. My father glowed with pride. Even the workers noticed. They said, "Maybe the boy is finally growing up." But growth without character is only camouflage. Jack was learning how the business worked, not how people worked. And that difference would soon break everything. Despite the flicker of promise, it did not take long for Jack's true nature to reappear. Once he learned the basics, once he earned a sliver of respect, he twisted it. He barked orders at older workers, corrected seamstresses who had been sewing longer than he had been alive, insulted suppliers behind their backs, acted like the factory belonged to him already, and my father let him. I tried to talk to him. "Jack, you cannot treat people like this." He smirked. "Why not?" They listened to me. They listened because my father told them to, not because Jack earned anything. But then came the woman who changed everything. The match that turned Jack's arrogance into wildfire. Karen. The first time she walked into the house, she scanned every room like she was evaluating assets. Her eyes lingered on the furniture, the paintings, my father's watch. She did not ask about our lives. She asked about profits. And when she looked at Jack, she looked like she saw a target, not a partner. That was when the destruction began. Karen knew exactly how to manipulate Jack. She whispered into his ear like poison dripping from a silver spoon. You deserve more. You are the rightful heir. Your sisters and their husbands are draining your opportunities. Your father is holding you back. And Jack believed every word. Suddenly, he began pushing for control. Father, the company needs fresh leadership. Father, it is time for you to retire. Father, the others are slowing things down. He said these things with Karen's hand on his knee and her eyes watching all of us like a wolf watching sheep. One day, she dropped the bomb that nearly tore us apart. She accused my husband of stealing money from the company. A lie. A calculated, vicious lie. She spread it through whispers. A comment at dinner. A hint to my father. A suggestion to Jack. And soon my father called my husband into his office. He asked him to explain irregularities that did not exist. I will never forget the humiliation on my husband's face. Karen watched the family unravel with a satisfied smile. My father, overwhelmed by tension, made the worst decision of his life. He bought us out. After years of devotion, years of watching and protecting his company, he paid my husband and me to leave. He said he wanted peace. He said this was best for everyone. But it was not about peace. It was about Jack. It always had been. We accepted because we had no choice. You cannot win a fight against someone your father refuses to see clearly. Jack then bought my father out. And just like that, the company fell entirely into the hands of a reckless boy and the ambitious woman standing behind him. I remember walking out of that building for the last time, the smell of steamed cotton lingering in the air. My stomach twisted with dread. I knew what was coming. I had seen the cracks forming long before my father admitted they were there. As we left, I whispered to myself, Father, please do not let him ruin everything you built. But fate has a cruel sense of irony. He ruined everything. Without us stabilizing the company, everything started collapsing. Jack had ideas but no discipline. Karen pushed for expansion with money that did not exist. They hired recklessly. They fired impulsively. They demanded respect instead of earning it. Seamstresses quit. Suppliers cut ties. Orders were late. Bills piled up. The company that once felt like a living, breathing extension of our family began to rot, piece by piece. And in the end, Jack did what he always did when consequences arrived. He ran back to our father. Father, I just need another loan. Father, I swear I can save it. Father, do you want your company to die? My father, who could barely sleep from stress, gave him more money. But money cannot fix a broken soul. And Jack's soul had been broken long before adulthood. Eventually, my father had to buy back what little remained. He sold it to a larger firm. It crushed him, but it stabilized the family financially. Then he reduced Jack's inheritance for the damage. And that lit the first fire of rage in Jack's eyes. The same rage I would later watch extinguish when I took everything from him. Jack did not take the reduced inheritance quietly. He exploded. You are punishing me for trying. You took the company away from me. You should have given me more time. This family never wanted me to succeed. My father, exhausted and sick of excuses, said the one thing Jack never expected. You failed because you chose to fail. Jack stared at him in disbelief. My father had never spoken to him like that. Not once. But it was too late. The damage was already done. That was the moment bitterness hardened inside Jack like concrete. He never forgave my father. Not openly. Not quietly. Not even to himself. He passed the blame to everyone else because blaming himself would have shattered the fantasy world he lived in. He remarried after Karen left him. Helen. At first she seemed harmless. A hairdresser with charm and ambition. But Jack had a weakness for women who wanted money he did not have. And Helen was no exception. Soon he was dipping into the family emergency fund to start her little business. It worked well enough, But Jack and Helen spent money like it grew from the walls. Trips, cars, expensive outfits, lavish dinners. They saved nothing. And when it all fell apart, their marriage followed. Jack was soon alone again, bitter again, broke again, and ready to make his next mistake. One afternoon my phone rang. Jack's name lit up the screen. I hesitated before answering. Every time he called, trouble came with him like a shadow. He said he needed a favor. It sounded innocent. Could he store some goods in our garage for a few days? My husband muttered under his breath. No, absolutely not. But I still believed maybe Jack had grown up. Maybe prison, heartbreak, and financial collapse had finally taught him something. I convinced my husband to let him store the items. 3 weeks later, the police arrived. Jack was arrested for possession of stolen goods and drug smuggling. Our garage had been part of his operation. I will never forget the sound my mother made when she heard the news. It was not a scream, not a cry. It was a sound of pure heartbreak. My father's face turned gray. His hands trembled. He refused to bail Jack out this time. He refused to speak for him. He refused to take another step into the quicksand Jack kept dragging us toward. That was the day my father stopped protecting the son he once idolized. It was also the day he began preparing his revenge. Jack served his time. Prison did not soften him. It hardened him. When he got out, he married again. And again. Each marriage ended in debt, betrayal, and more financial chaos. Each woman left with a business my father had funded for them. Jack drained every savings account he could touch. Every emergency fund. Every lifeline. He was a walking disaster dressed in expensive clothes he did not pay for. And then the final chapter began. My father grew sick. Not suddenly. Not violently. But slowly. A steady decline over months. He accepted his fate with quiet dignity. He told us he had lived a long life. A full life. A hard life. But there was something in his eyes, a cold spark of intent, that made me uneasy. He began selling items from his house. Furniture. Tools. Collectibles. But every time I asked what he was doing with the money, he said the same thing. Do not worry. It is handled in the will. I did not understand then. I did later. Because while my father sold those items, Jack pretended to help. He offered to drop things off, sell them on my father's behalf, make things easier. And he pocketed the money. My father knew. He documented it. On his 95th birthday, my father took my hand. He said, "You have been my strength, Anna. You always saw the truth, even when I did not. I am leaving you something important. Use it wisely." 2 weeks later, he passed away. Peacefully. Quietly. With all of us around him. Except Jack. Jack showed up after. Smiling. Light on his feet. Already asking questions about the will. The morning after the funeral, I found the wooden box he had left for me. The box filled with decades of records. Every betrayal. Every debt. Every theft. Every business failure. Every signature proving Jack had drained our father dry. And on top of it all, that note. Use this. End it. My father had left me the weapon. I decided to pull the trigger. When Jack arrived at the will reading, he walked in like a man ready to collect his prize. His smile made my skin crawl. He hugged no one. Offered no condolences. He simply sat down and rubbed his hands together. "Let's get started," he said. The notary read the will. My siblings and I received generous portions. Then came Jack's. His smile widened. Until the notary said, "Jack's inheritance will only be released after all documented debts owed to the estate have been repaid in full." Jack blinked, confused. Then angry. "What debts?" I slid the box toward the notary. He opened it. His eyes widened. He began reading out loud. Loan. Loan. Debt. Withdrawal. Business expense. Unauthorized sale of property. Unreturned funds. Missing cash. Stolen assets. Each line felt like a hammer striking Jack's skull. The color drained from his face. "How much do I owe?" he whispered. The notary told him the amount. His legs buckled. It was more money than Jack had ever had in his life. And it was more than the inheritance. Meaning he would get nothing. Absolutely nothing. I looked him in the eye and said, "Father planned this. and I will carry it through. Jack's world collapsed, and I watched it happen without blinking. Jack staggered back into his chair. For the first time in decades, he looked small. Not powerful. Not smug. Not untouchable. Small. Like a child finally realizing the fire he played with was real, and now it was burning him alive. His voice cracked. "Anna, you cannot do this to me." I held his gaze. "I am not doing anything to you. You did this to yourself." The notary cleared his throat and restated the legal terms. All debts must be settled before inheritance can be released. If debts exceed the inheritance is forfeited. Jack stared at the table, as if trying to find an escape route hidden between the wood grain. There was none. He whispered, "This is wrong." I answered softly, "No. This is justice." He shot up from his chair, knocked it over, and slammed his fists on the table. "I am your brother." "Yes," I said. "And for 30 years, you have been our burden." The room fell silent. Even the notary looked away, unable to stand the raw truth hanging in the air. Jack had no fight left. Just fear. After the reading, he followed me outside. The wind was cold. The sky was heavy. He looked like a man drowning. "Anna, please. I need that money. I deserve that money." "You deserve nothing, you stole," I said. He grabbed my arm. Not roughly. Desperately. "Tell them to forgive the debt. You can do that. You are the oldest. You can fix this." Fixing things was what I had done all my life. For him. For the family. For everyone. But not anymore. I pulled my arm away slowly. If Father wanted your debt forgiven, he would have written it that way. Instead, he documented every cent you ever took. Every lie. Every bail. Every failure. He wanted you to pay. Jack's eyes filled with tears. Real ones. The first I had seen from him since we were children. He whispered, "Please. I have nothing left." "Then start over," I said. Like the rest of us had to. I walked away. His sobs followed me down the street. Days passed. Jack called. Then texted. Then showed up at my house. He tried anger. "How dare you destroy your own brother?" He tried manipulation. "Father would be ashamed of you." He tried guilt. "You are ruining my life." He tried pity. "I will end up homeless." But every time, I answered the same way. "You owe what you owe." He could not accept it. His entire identity had been built on the belief that someone would always rescue him. That someone would always clean up the mess. That consequences were for other people. For the first time, the world was not bending for him. It was closing in. He went to each of my sisters. They all gave him the same answer. "Pay your debt." He went to the notary. They repeated the legal terms. He went to the bank. They laughed at his credit. He tried to challenge the will. The lawyer nearly laughed. "Your father documented everything far too well." My father planned this revenge with surgical precision. A week later, Jack showed up at my door again. He looked worse. Thinner. Pale. Eyes sunken. He handed me an envelope. Inside was the letter our father wrote to him. I had already read my own letter. Full of love, gratitude, and regret. Jack's letter was different. He asked me, "Did you read it?" "No," I said. "It was meant for you." He pressed a hand to his forehead. He told me that the letter destroyed him. My father had written a truth Jack had spent his whole life refusing to hear. "You broke everything I gave you. You ruined what I built. You lied to me. You stole from me. And every time you fell, I picked you up. I should not have. I should have let you fall sooner. And maybe you would have learned." The final line read, "My last gift to you is the one lesson you always refused to learn. Actions have consequences. Pay what you owe." Jack sobbed until he could not breathe. After reading the letter, Jack did the only thing he could do. He paid. Every cent. Every loan. Every stolen amount. Every business expense he had drained. Every emergency fund he emptied. Even the money he stole when selling my father's belongings behind his back. The debt was enormous. It took everything he had left. Savings. Cars. The barbershop equipment. His investments. Insurance payouts. Loans from friends. He sold furniture. He sold jewelry. He sold anything that could bring in a few coins. And when he was done paying, he had nothing. No inheritance. No property. No dignity. No more lies to hide behind. He disappeared. Cut himself off from all of us. Moved away. Changed numbers. He could not face the family he had drained for decades. My sisters asked if I felt guilty. I answered them the truth. Guilt is for the innocent. Jack was never innocent. In the quiet that followed Jack's disappearance, something strange happened. My home, for the first time in years, felt still, calm, balanced. There were no sudden phone calls asking for money. No frantic messages begging for help. No unexpected visits filled with lies wrapped in charm. The constant weight he imposed on all of us was gone. My mother slept better. My sisters laughed more. My husband no longer tensed when the phone rang. It was as if the entire family had been living under a shadow we pretended was sunlight. And suddenly, we were standing in real daylight again. One afternoon, my sister visited me with homemade bread. She placed it on the table and said, "Do you feel it too?" "Feel what?" I asked. "Peace." I nodded. Peace is not the absence of noise, I told her. It is the absence of chaos. And Jack had been our chaos for far too long. We did not celebrate what happened. There were no toasts. No triumph. No victory dance. Revenge does not always come with fireworks. Sometimes revenge is simply the quiet that finally arrives after a lifetime of storms. Weeks passed. Then months. Jack remained silent. His number disconnected. His address unknown. People in town whispered. Some said he moved away to start over. Some said he ran from the shame. Some said he could not face the truth written in our father's letter. But I knew the real reason. For the first time in his life, Jack had no one left to blame. He could not blame the school. He could not blame his wives. He could not blame the company. He could not blame us. The debt forced him to face the person he had become. A man who used everyone. And lost everything. That kind of truth can crush even the strongest. And Jack had never been strong. He had only been protected. When protection ended, so did he. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did. If taking revenge on my own brother left a scar. I always answer them honestly. Yes, there is a scar. But not from the revenge. From the years before it. The nights I stayed awake worrying about him. The money he stole. The lies he told. The pain he caused our mother. The exhaustion he caused our father. The weight he placed on all of us again and again. Revenge did not create the scar. Jack did. What I did was stitch it closed. My father gave me the needle. The documents. The evidence. The authority. He trusted me to finish what he could not. To protect the family after he was gone. To restore what Jack had destroyed. And I did. Not out of cruelty, but out of duty. One night, long after everything was over, I found myself sitting alone with the wooden box again. I ran my fingers over the rough edges. Opened it slowly. The documents were gone. Filed away with the estate. Settled. Finished. Only one thing remained inside. My father's final note. Use this. End it. For years I wondered if father regretted handing Jack everything. If he wished he had been harder, stricter, more honest with him. But as I sat there, reading those few words again, I understood something sharp and sad. My father loved Jack more than Jack ever understood. The revenge he left behind was not born of hatred. It was born of heartbreak. A parent's heartbreak turns cold, not hot. It becomes measured, patient, surgical. It becomes a warning, a lesson. A final message to a child who refused to listen when the parent was alive. Actions have consequences. Even if those consequences come from a coffin. I do not know where Jack is today. Maybe another country. Maybe another town. Maybe sitting in a small apartment wondering where it all went wrong. I do know one thing. He never contacted us again. Not on holidays. Not on birthdays. Not on anniversaries. Not when our mother passed. Not when our youngest sister got married. Not when the company building was finally demolished by the new owners. We became ghosts to him, and he became a ghost to us. Sometimes, when I walk past the old factory lot, I imagine a different version of life. One where Jack grew up with gratitude instead of greed. One where he stood beside us instead of above us. One where he respected the legacy our father built. But that version of life never existed. Not really. And maybe that is why my father chose revenge in the end. Not to hurt Jack, but to finally protect everyone else. As the empty factory lot stretched under the sunset, I would sometimes close my eyes and remember the sounds it used to hold. The rhythmic tapping of sewing machines, the hiss of steam, the laughter of workers who felt like family, my father's steady footsteps as he walked the floor, the soft music playing from an old radio. Those memories felt warm, golden, untainted. Then I would remember Jack's voice echoing through the halls when he took over. Sharp, cold, commanding respect he never earned, dismissing advice he desperately needed. And the warmth around me would sink into something heavy, because for all the beauty there once was, Jack managed to poison it. He poisoned everything he touched. And that is why, as cruel as it sounds, losing him brought clarity. Not joy, not satisfaction, just clarity. Our family tree grew straighter the moment he cut himself off. Our home grew quieter. Our hearts felt lighter. Sometimes the strongest healing comes not from addition, but from removal. One winter evening, my youngest sister came over with tea and sat on my couch. She studied me for a long moment, her expression soft but serious. She finally asked, "Do you ever worry that what we did was too harsh?" I stared into my cup, watching the steam curl upward like fading ghosts. "Harsh," I said, "is what we lived through for 30 years. Harsh is burying father with the weight of Jack's failures on his shoulders. Harsh is watching our mother age 10 years every time Jack made a mistake. Harsh is being blamed, lied to, used, manipulated, and drained. Holding someone accountable is not harsh. It is humane." She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "I think I needed to hear that," she whispered. I reached out and held her hand. Father chose us in the end. He chose truth. He chose balance. He chose protection. We only carried out his will. His real will. Not the legal document, but the justice he wanted for this family. My sister let out a shaky breath. "So you do not regret it?" I looked her dead in the eyes. "No, not for 1 second." When the first full year without Jack passed, I lit a candle for my father. Not for Jack. For father. For the man who believed in fairness so deeply that he documented his own heartbreak, line by line, in perfectly written records. For the man who finally saw the truth about his son, and chose to protect the rest of us. For the man who handed me the final tool with which to end the cycle of destruction. I placed the candle on the windowsill and whispered, "I did what you asked of me." The flame flickered gently, peacefully, almost like acknowledgement. As I sat there, watching it burn, a thought warmed my heart. People always say revenge is driven by anger. But this revenge was driven by love. Love for the family Jack had spent decades hurting. Love for my sisters. Love for my mother. Love for the legacy my father built with shaking hands and stained sleeves. Love can be gentle, but sometimes love becomes a sword. And I was the one who wielded it. There is a truth I learned through all of this. Not everyone deserves forgiveness. Forgiveness is not something you hand out like coins. It is earned. It is built. It is fought for. Jack never fought for anything. He took, used, consumed, expected. Forgiving a person who never sought redemption is not kindness. It is surrender. And I refuse to surrender the rest of our lives to the chaos he created. People who hear my story sometimes ask, "Did your father expect you to carry such a heavy burden?" The answer is yes. Because he trusted me. Because he knew I understood responsibility. Because he knew I could do what he could not bring himself to do while he was alive. He could not watch his only son unravel. But I could. I had no illusions left. Father gave me the truth. I gave the truth consequences. And now, years later, when I sit alone in my living room, the house quiet and warm around me, I do not feel bitterness. I do not feel triumph. I do not feel sorrow. I feel peace. Not the fragile peace that shatters at the first sign of trouble. The deep peace that comes when a wound is finally closed. Sometimes on quiet afternoons, I open a window and let the breeze drift in. It smells of fabric dust and old memories. It reminds me of the factory floor, the family we once were, the balance we lost, the balance we regained. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it leaves instructions in a wooden box. My father planned the revenge, but I delivered it. And I would do it again. Every cent, every signature, every final blow. Because in the end, some people learn only when everything they love is taken away. And Jack finally learned. The second year without Jack passed quietly. No messages. No rumors. No unexpected requests for help. Nothing. My mother, who once lived in constant fear of his next mistake, began smiling again. Her shoulders relaxed. Her voice softened. The lines on her face eased. She started tending her garden more, humming old songs as she trimmed the roses. One morning, she said to me, "I feel like I have my life back." It hit me hard, because that was the truth. Jack did not just break rules. He broke time. He stole years from us. Years of peace. Years of rest. Years my mother could have spent without worry. Removing him from our daily lives returned those years. Slowly. Gently. Like sunlight creeping back through a window that had been covered for too long. One afternoon, as we sipped tea, my mother said, "Your father would be proud of you. He always knew you had strength." I swallowed hard. "Strength," I replied, "is not something you feel. It is something you show when you have no other choice." She touched my hand. "You chose right." Sometimes I wonder if Jack ever opens my father's letter. If he reads it again. If his hands tremble the way mine trembled when I opened the box. I wonder if he remembers the nights my father stayed awake waiting for him to come home. The mornings my mother cried over broken promises. The birthdays he ruined. The money he stole. The fear he caused. The disappointment he never apologized for. Does he replay any of it in his mind? Does he regret even one moment? Or does he still blame us? I do not know. I may never know. But I do know this. His silence speaks louder than any confession could. A man who feels wronged fights to reclaim what he believes is his. A man who knows he is guilty hides. Jack has been hiding ever since. And I no longer care why. One day, years after everything ended, I returned to the site of the old factory. The building was gone. Only a flat, empty lot remained. Weeds pushing through cracks. Concrete slabs marking where lives once intertwined. I walked slowly across the space, letting memories rise like ghosts. Here was the cutting table where I learned how to fold fabric perfectly. Here was the office where my father taught me how to read a ledger. Here was the break room where workers shared jokes and coffee. Here was the machine line where we pressed robes so soft they felt like clouds. And here, in the very center, was the spot where Jack stood with his chest puffed out, believing the entire world belonged to him. I stood there quietly, letting the wind move around me. There was no bitterness, only stillness. If Jack had been a different man, this place might still be breathing, alive, growing, ours. But he was not, and I cannot rewrite the past, only close it. I bent down, picked up a small piece of brick left behind from the destruction, and held it for a moment before placing it back on the ground. "Goodbye," I whispered. Not to the building, to the life we once had. People imagine revenge as fire, explosive, hot, violent. But the truth is that real revenge is cold, quiet. It moves slowly through your veins like ice water. It sharpens your focus. It narrows your world into purpose. What I did to Jack was not an outburst, not a moment of anger, not a rash decision. It was the end of a line, the final chapter in a book that had been written long before I ever opened the box. My father wrote the story. I simply turned the page. And when people hear what I did, they often ask, "Did it feel good?" I always answer the same way. It felt necessary. Justice does not always feel like joy. Sometimes it feels like setting down a heavy load you've carried for far too long. A load Jack never helped carry. A load he created. And once it was on the ground, I realized how heavy it had been. As I grew older, I found myself thinking more often about legacy. What we leave behind. What survives us. What people remember. My father left behind courage, work ethic, strength, and a final act of love disguised as revenge. My sisters left behind families, laughter, and lives built from honesty. My mother left behind kindness, and the reminder that forgiveness must have limits. And Jack left behind a warning that even the most loved child can destroy themselves if they never face consequences. That enabling is not compassion. That protecting someone from their own actions is not love. It is a slow death. His fall was tragic, but it was not surprising. It was the outcome of a lifetime of escape. And in the end, the only person who finally made him face the truth was me. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because he left me no other choice. I became the final wall he crashed into. Not out of malice, but out of mercy. Mercy for the family he had tormented for decades. Years after everything settled, I found myself sitting with my granddaughter at my dining table. She had always been curious about her family's past, about the strange silence surrounding her great-uncle Jack. She asked gentle questions, the kind children ask when they sense a story but do not yet understand its weight. I hesitated at first, not because I was ashamed, but because the truth was heavy, and truth delivered too early can bruise a young heart. But she insisted, and something inside me whispered, tell her so she understands the cost of turning away from responsibility. So I began with the simple facts. Who her great-grandfather was, what he built, how he loved us, how he loved Jack, and how Jack took advantage of that love. As I spoke, I noticed her expression shift, from curiosity, to shock, to something like sorrow. She was beginning to understand that monsters are not always strangers. Sometimes they share your blood. When I told her about the box, about the debts, about the will, she leaned forward, eyes wide. You did that? She whispered. Yes, I did. Was it hard? The hardest thing I have ever done. Was it wrong? No. It was right. And sometimes the right thing feels like stepping into a storm alone. She nodded slowly, absorbing the truth. Not judging me, just understanding. Children can sense sincerity in a way adults often cannot. And she knew even then that my actions came from years of wounds finally allowed to close. My granddaughter then asked something no one else had ever dared. Did you love him? Her question stole my breath for a moment. Love is complicated. Not soft like people imagine. Not always warm. I answered her honestly. Yes. I loved the boy he used to be. The one who ran barefoot through the yard. The one who clung to my dress when he had nightmares. The one who laughed at silly jokes and held my hand when we walked to school. I loved him long after he stopped loving us back. Long after he turned selfish. Long after he turned cruel. Love does not vanish when someone becomes harmful. It just becomes painful. Then she asked, did it hurt to take everything from him? I closed my eyes. Yes, it hurt. But it would have hurt more to let him keep hurting us. That is the truth people do not understand. Revenge is not always born from hatred. Sometimes it is born from years of loving someone who refused to love you responsibly in return. Sometimes revenge is the final act of love. A love that says, I will not let you destroy any more lives. After that conversation, I sat alone for a long time. Not in regret, but in reflection. I wondered if Jack ever had a moment where he realized how much love he had been given. If he ever understood the weight my father carried. If he ever recognized the chances he wasted. Did he ever think about the nights we waited for him? The bills we covered? The lies we swallowed? The tears my mother shed? The exhaustion in my father's eyes? The disappointment that never left the air? Or did he live in the fantasy he always clung to, where he was the victim and we were the villains? Some men never face their own reflection. The truth scares them. It unravels them. That might have been Jack. A boy who never grew into a man because responsibility terrified him. And when I finally forced responsibility upon him, he vanished. People say time heals wounds. But some wounds only heal when the person causing them disappears. As the years continued, I realized something profound. Revenge does not echo forever. It settles. It becomes quiet. It becomes still. One afternoon, while dusting shelves, I found a small photograph of Jack from childhood. He was about 7, smiling brightly, mud on his shoes, hair messy from playing outside, eyes full of trust, full of possibility. I held the photograph between my fingers for a long time. That boy never meant to hurt anyone. He was not born selfish, not born entitled, not born destructive. He became that way, made by the choices others made around him, shaped by the worship my father gave him, shaped by the lack of consequences, shaped by the belief that everything would always be forgiven. If you raise a child to believe the world owes him, one day he will try to collect a debt the world never agreed to pay. I placed the photo back in the drawer, not in anger, not in mourning, just acceptance. Some stories do not have happy endings. Some endings are simply truthful. Now, when I tell this story, I tell it not to glorify revenge, but to honor justice. The justice my father could not deliver alone. The justice my sisters deserved. The justice my mother prayed for. The justice Jack spent his whole life avoiding. I tell it because someone, somewhere, is living through their own version of Jack. Someone is giving and giving while another takes and takes. Someone is enabling a child, a sibling, a partner, believing love means covering their sins. But love without boundaries is not love. It is surrender. It is destruction disguised as devotion. And one day, that kind of love demands a price heavy enough to crush an entire family. My father understood that too late. But he understood it nonetheless. And so he handed me the means to restore the balance. A wooden box, a lifetime of records, and one final instruction. There are nights when I sit by the window, listening to the wind move through the trees, and I think about the moment I opened that wooden box for the first time. The weight of it, the silence of it, the truth packed so tightly inside that it felt like the air shifted around me. I remember how my hands shook as I lifted the lid, how the papers were neatly arranged, how every page felt like a confession my father never said out loud, how his meticulous handwriting carved the truth into permanence. I realized then that the box was not created in a moment of anger. It was created over years. Years of disappointment. Years of fear. Years of watching his son take until there was almost nothing left to give. My father never shouted. He never lashed out. He never disowned Jack. No. He simply prepared. Prepared for the day he knew would come. The day Jack would stand before his siblings, expecting reward, and instead meet reality. That box was my father's final voice, his last boundary, his last attempt to protect the people who actually loved him. And I was the one entrusted to carry that voice forward. The day I confronted Jack with the documents, a part of me felt hollow. Not triumphant, not angry, just hollow. Because anger disappears quickly, but betrayal lingers. And Jack had betrayed us for so long that I no longer knew what it felt like to see him without pain attached to his name. But when I watched him crumble in the notary's office, when I saw his hands shake and his face drain of confidence, I saw something else too. The boy he once was, buried under layers of arrogance and entitlement. The boy who could have lived a beautiful life. The boy who could have had a future filled with family and legacy. The boy who could have been my ally instead of my enemy. And yet he chose something else. He chose to be the source of our wounds. So when people ask if I felt bad watching him break, I tell them this. I felt bad when I watched him break our father. I felt bad when I watched him break my mother. I felt bad when I watched him break himself. But watching him face the consequences of his choices? No, that did not make me feel bad. It made me feel free. Months after Jack vanished, the notary contacted me one last time regarding the estate. All debts had been settled. The file was closed. Legally, financially, and emotionally. The chapter was over. I remember walking home from that meeting in a strange haze. The sun was low. The air smelled like freshly cut grass. Children played in the distance. Life moved on. My footsteps felt lighter than they had in decades. Not because I enjoyed what happened, but because the burden was finally off my shoulders. When I reached my home, I stood at the doorway for a moment, taking in the quiet. My husband sat by the fireplace reading. My mother hummed in the kitchen. My sisters were due to visit later that evening. For the first time in as long as I could remember, everything felt normal, peaceful, safe. I realized then that revenge is not a moment. It is a release of fear, a release of exhaustion, a release of pain that had calcified inside me for years. I had not destroyed Jack. He had destroyed himself. I simply removed the shield he had been hiding behind. As time softened the edges of memory, I found myself reflecting more on the nature of consequences. Life gives us many chances to change course. Jack had more than anyone. A chance when he stole from the shop. A chance when he was expelled. A chance when he ruined the company. A chance when he nearly sent my husband to prison with lies. A chance when he involved us in his criminal dealings. A chance when he took advantage of our father's frailty. A chance when he pocketed the money from those sales. Every time we forgave. Every time we hoped. Every time he betrayed that hope. Consequences are not cruelty. They are truth. And truth, when delayed, becomes sharper. My father delayed it too long. And when he finally faced it, he wrote the truth into law. I simply turned his truth into action. That was my duty. That was his final request. And fulfilling a dying father's request is not revenge. It is honor. Now that I am older, I see the story with clearer eyes. Not as the woman who carried the burden, but as someone who understands how a family can fracture even when love exists. Jack was not born broken. He was shaped by exceptions. Shaped by excuses. Shaped by a father's blind love. Shaped by a system that rewarded charm over character. He grew into a man who believed consequences were optional. But they never were. Not truly. They waited. Quietly. Patiently. Inside a wooden box his father built for decades. And when the time came, I opened that box. With steady hands. And fulfilled a promise my father never spoke aloud. Protect the family. Protect the legacy. Protect the truth. I did all of that. I did it without hatred. Without cruelty. Without joy. I did it because someone had to. Someone had to be the final wall. Someone had to end the cycle. Someone had to say, no more. And that someone was me. Years later, I found myself thinking less about the revenge, and more about the patterns that created it. Patterns that began long before Jack was born. Patterns woven through generations. Patterns of favoritism, of silence, of sacrifice. Every family has roots. Some roots grow deep and strong. Others grow tangled and dangerous. Jack was a branch fed by the wrong roots. By indulgence instead of structure. By excuses instead of discipline. By blind hope instead of honest correction. My father was a good man. But good men can still make fatal mistakes. He mistook love for protection. He mistook forgiveness for guidance. He mistook second chances for solutions. He thought he was helping Jack when he forgave everything. But all he did was teach him to take more. And when reality finally caught up, it caught up with all of us, not just him. Repeating those patterns would have doomed us. Breaking them was the only way forward. And breaking them required a final act. A sharp, clean break. That was the true nature of the revenge. Not punishment. Correction. A reset for the rest of us. Life continued. Seasons passed. The family rebuilt itself around the absence of chaos. Birthdays became peaceful gatherings. Holidays no longer felt like minefields. My mother's smile no longer looked forced. My sisters spoke freely, without fear of Jack barging and demanding money or attention. We were no longer living braced for impact. We were simply living. One evening, my mother made her favorite dessert and placed it on the table. She paused before eating and said softly, "This is the first time in years I have felt truly safe." Her voice trembled, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Jack had taken so much from her, from us. But his absence gave something back. Security, sanity, stability, that more than anything, confirmed that the revenge was necessary. It closed a door that had been slamming against us for decades. My granddaughter visited again, older now, her questions sharper, her understanding deeper. She had grown into a thoughtful young woman, curious about the world and the people in it. She asked me, "Do you think Jack ever understood why it happened?" I thought for a moment. No, I do not think he ever understood. Jack never had the ability to see beyond himself. His heart was a mirror. He only saw his own reflection, his own needs, his own wounds. He never saw ours. That is the tragedy of selfishness. It blinds. It shields. It isolates. People like Jack cannot understand consequences. because they never learned to understand responsibility. My granddaughter frowned. That must have been very hard for you. It was, I admitted. But sometimes the hardest thing is also the most important. She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quiet. I think you saved the family. Those words settled into my chest like a warm, steady pulse. With time, my anger faded. Not because Jack deserved forgiveness, but because I no longer needed the anger. I once thought revenge would leave a permanent mark, that I would carry its weight forever. But instead, it left space. Space to breathe. Space to rest. Space to live. When something toxic leaves your life, you realize just how deep the poison ran. Jack was not only a burden, he was a shadow. And removing him, forcing accountability on him, felt like opening a window in a dark, stale room. Fresh air rushed in. Light returned. The room did not change. I did. That is what revenge truly did. It freed me from the version of myself that tolerated too much for too long. And what remains now is clarity. In my final years, I often think about legacy again. Not the legacy of businesses or money, but the legacy of choices. Father's choice to finally document the truth. My choice to act on it. My sister's choice to stand with me. Mother's choice to support us despite the pain. These choices shaped our family, far more than Jack ever did. Jack's legacy is a lesson, one I share with anyone who listens. Do not protect someone from consequences. Do not confuse love with sacrifice. Do not allow one person to drain the spirit of an entire family, because consequences delayed become consequences amplified. My father delayed them too long. I delivered them when he no longer could. Not out of cruelty, not out of vengeance alone, but out of duty. Duty to my siblings, duty to my mother, duty to myself, duty to the truth. That is the legacy I leave behind. A legacy of boundaries, a legacy of accountability, a legacy of peace. And peace, after decades of chaos, is the sweetest inheritance of all. The older I became, the more I understood that revenge is not a moment. It is a process, a transformation, a reclaiming of power that was taken, drained, or stolen long before the revenge ever happened. When I opened that wooden box, I did not feel like a villain. I felt like a guardian, a protector, someone finally holding the weight that my father could no longer carry. People think revenge is fire, but in truth it is ice. Cold, clear, sharp. It forces you to see yourself without illusions. I saw a woman who had spent her entire life cleaning up her brother's chaos. I saw the exhaustion in my mother's eyes. I saw the disappointment carved into my father's face. I saw years of sacrifice that Jack never once acknowledged. And I saw, with painful clarity, that someone had to draw the line. Not tomorrow. Not next year. Now. And so I did. When I signed the documents forcing Jack to repay every debt, my hands were steady, because for the first time, I was not acting from emotion. I was acting F. The community eventually noticed Jack's absence. People asked questions. Rumors surfaced. Some said he had run away after a failed business. Some said he had gotten into trouble with dangerous people. Some even claimed he had inherited nothing because father favored the daughters. Let them talk. Let them guess. The truth was something none of them would ever believe. That a father spent his final years quietly documenting every betrayal his son committed, and that a daughter used those documents to shut the door on him forever. It sounded too cold, too calculated, too exact. But that precision is what made the revenge perfect. It was not emotional. It was not reactive. It was not fueled by hatred. It was fueled by necessity. And necessity is a force sharper than anger could ever be. Whenever rumors reached me, I stayed silent. Not to hide the truth, but because the truth belonged only to us. The family he hurt. The family he abandoned. The family he nearly destroyed. We earned the right to silence. Jack earned the consequences. One morning, I received a letter. No return address. No signature. Just a folded sheet of paper inside an envelope worn from travel. It was from Jack. The writing was messy, uneven, rushed. His words were hard to decipher. but the meaning was painfully clear. He wrote about regret, about fear, about mistakes he could no longer outrun. He wrote about our father, about the letter that shattered him, about the debts he struggled to pay, about nights he spent alone wondering where it all went wrong. Then he wrote something I never expected. I know now that I did this to myself. My breath caught. For decades, he had blamed everyone else. Me, father, our sisters, his wives, his circumstances. But here, in shaky handwriting, was the first moment of truth he had ever spoken. He continued, I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for understanding. I sat back slowly, the letter trembling in my hands. It was not an apology, not fully, but it was a crack in the wall he built around himself. And cracks, even small ones, let reality in. I read the letter several times, each time feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not anger, something softer, something like closure. I folded the letter carefully and placed it into the same wooden box my father had given me. The box that once held evidence. Now it held something else entirely. A final confession. For a moment, I imagined Jack writing it. Sitting in a small room somewhere. A dim lamp on the table. Paper trembling as he finally put his truth into words. Admitting not to us, but to himself, that he had been the architect of his own downfall. I whispered into the quiet room. I understand, Jack. But understanding is not the same as forgetting. And it is not the same as returning. He had chosen his path. We had chosen ours. Nothing could undo what had been done. But maybe, just maybe, the truth had finally reached him. And that was enough. Years passed peacefully after that letter. My family healed. My mother lived the rest of her life with calm in her eyes. My sisters built futures without fear. My children grew up knowing boundaries, respect, and accountability. And me, I grew older, but lighter. The burden I carried was gone. The wooden box remained tucked in the top drawer of my desk, not as a reminder of revenge, but as a reminder of truth. Truth that my father trusted me with. Truth that saved my family. Truth that ended decades of chaos. People assume revenge leaves your hands dirty, but sometimes, revenge washes them clean. I did not destroy my brother. I revealed him to himself. And once he saw the truth, he disappeared into it. That was his final choice. Mine was to protect the family he abandoned. And I did. I carry no regret. Only peace. Peace built from hard decisions. Peace built from truth. Peace built from the moment I opened a wooden box and finally understood what love sometimes demands. As I entered the final decade of my life, I began organizing my belongings. Old letters, photographs, documents, the simple artifacts of a long-lived story. I found myself returning again and again to that wooden box. The wood had darkened with age. The corners were worn smooth from my fingertips. The lock no longer clicked as sharply as it once did. But it still held the weight of my father's last message. It still held Jack's letter of regret. I opened it one last time. Inside lay the fragments of a story that could have destroyed us, yet instead became the foundation of our healing. In that moment, I understood something I had not realized until then. The box was never simply about revenge. It was about truth. And truth, once revealed, never returns to silence. I gently closed the lid. Not with sorrow, but with gratitude. This box had once been a weapon. Now it was simply part of my history, part of the legacy I would leave behind. A legacy my granddaughter would one day inherit. Not the burden, but the lesson. One evening, I sat with my granddaughter as the sun dipped behind the horizon. The light turned the room gold, the air warm, the moment soft. She noticed the wooden box on the table and asked, "What will happen to it when you are gone?" I smiled gently. "You will decide that." She looked surprised. Me, "Yes, because you understand the story, and because you will know what to do with it." Her eyes widened just a little, glittering with the weight of responsibility. But she did not shy away. She said, "I think I will keep it, to remind me that love has limits." I nodded, because every love needs boundaries, and every family needs one person brave enough to draw them. She took my hand, hers young and warm, mine old and wrinkled, and in that moment, I realized the true purpose of everything that had happened. Revenge had ended a cycle. Truth had rewritten our story. But the lesson, the real inheritance, was hers now. As my strength began to fade, I found myself reflecting more deeply on my father. Not the man who protected Jack too much. Not the man who overlooked our warnings. Not the man who made mistake after mistake out of love. But the man who in the end, faced the truth with clarity. He had always been a builder. He built a company from nothing. He built a home. He built opportunities for us. He built a future with his own hands. And when Jack tore pieces of that future apart, Father built one last thing. A plan. A plan to restore what had been broken. A plan to protect his daughters. A plan to give his son one final chance at responsibility. He could not save Jack, but he could save us. And that is exactly what his box did. As I sat thinking of him, I whispered, "You did not fail, Father. You corrected your mistake. And you trusted me to finish the task. That is how love becomes honor. That is how regret becomes purpose." On a quiet spring morning, my sisters and I gathered for tea. We were older now, hair silvering, hands weaker, but hearts stronger. We sat in a circle, sunlight warming our shoulders, sharing memories the way old friends do. At one point, my youngest sister said, "Do you remember how afraid we were to speak up when Jack was around?" We all nodded. It was a fear we had learned young, a fear shaped by disappointment, a fear born of being ignored. Another sister added, "Father never wanted to see the truth, but in the end he saw it clearer than any of us." I lifted my cup. To Father. They lifted theirs. To Father. We drank. Not in mourning, but in gratitude. We could finally talk about those years without bitterness gripping our voices. We could finally breathe easily when remembering the past. That is what closure feels like. Not happy, but whole. As I approached the twilight of my life, I often thought about Jack not with anger, but with a sadness that no longer hurt. He was a child given too much freedom, too few boundaries, and too many rescues. He grew into a man who never learned cause and effect, and that ignorance shaped him into someone who could not participate in a functioning family, who could not handle responsibility, who could not grow. His downfall was tragic, but not surprising. And yet, I do not hate him. Hatred keeps wounds open. Il chose ligne. Forgiveness? No. Forgiveness belongs only to those who seek it with their whole heart. But acceptance? Yes. Acceptance is what remained. I accepted that Jack lived by his choices, and we lived by ours. In the end, I gave him the only gift he had ever needed, the truth he spent his life avoiding. And whether he grew from it or ran from it, that was his final choice to make. Mine was peace, and I chose it completely. In my final reflections, I realized something profound about the nature of revenge. It does not change the past, but it can protect the future. When I opened that wooden box, I was not rewriting what Jack had done. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal was already carved into memory. Revenge did not erase those scars. What it did was prevent new ones. By enforcing the debts, by carrying out my father's final instruction, I closed the door Jack kept bursting through. I sealed off the part of our lives where chaos lived. I made sure my children, my grandchildren, and everyone who came after would never bear the weight we carried for decades. Some might call that revenge. Some might call it justice. Some might call it survival. To me, it was simply responsibility. And responsibility has been the guiding force of my entire life. As I sat one evening watching the lamp cast warm light across the room, I felt something deep within me settle. Not joy, not triumph. Peace. Full and complete. In the years that followed, my granddaughter grew even more curious about her family history. On one of her visits, she asked if she could read the letter Jack sent me. I hesitated, not because I wanted to hide it, but because truth carries weight. It is not something to hand over lightly. But she was no longer a child. Her eyes held maturity, patience, understanding. So I handed her the folded paper. She read it silently. When she finished, she placed it gently on the table. She whispered, "He finally understood." I nodded. Perhaps. Or perhaps he simply could not outrun the truth anymore. She asked, "Does that change anything?" I smiled softly. "Truth does not erase consequences, my dear. It only illuminates them." She leaned back, thinking deeply, then said something that warmed my heart. "You gave him honesty. That was the kindest thing anyone ever gave him." Maybe she was right. Maybe forcing him to confront himself was not cruelty, but clarity. And clarity is a kind of mercy most people never receive. One day, on a quiet afternoon, I took a slow walk through town. The streets had changed. Shops had new names. Faces were younger. But the memories stayed. I passed by the old bakery where Jack once stole coins from my coat pocket to buy sweets. I passed the school he was expelled from. I passed the corner where he lied to my mother about bruises he caused himself. Every corner held a ghost of the boy he once was. As I walked, I felt no anger, no bitterness, no sorrow, just understanding. People are not born cruel. They are shaped by attention or neglect, by boundaries or indulgence, by truth or lies. Jack was shaped by the wrong things. He grew into the shape of his choices, and then, finally, into the shape of his consequences. I paused in front of the empty factory lot. The wind brushed against my face, cool and soft. "The past lives here," I whispered, "but it does not own me anymore." Then I turned and walked away. Not long before my health began to fail, I decided to sort through everything one final time. I found old family photos, letters from my father, school drawings from my children, and then I found the wooden box again. My hands trembled as I placed it on the table. I opened the lid slowly. Inside lay Jack's letter, father's note, and one last envelope I had not opened in years. It was addressed to me. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately, shaky, but still strong. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside he wrote, "My Anna, you were always the one who saw clearly. You carried the family when others fell. I trust you with this burden, not because you deserve hardship, but because you understand truth. If I could have spared you this, I would have. But I leave it to you because you are the only one who can protect the family when I am gone. Whatever comes, remember this. I am proud of you." Tears stung my eyes as I folded the letter, not from sadness, but from the weight of love it carried. My father had not asked me to deliver revenge. He had asked me to deliver truth, and I had done exactly that. As my life neared its quiet end, I found comfort in the knowledge that I had fulfilled my father's final wish. I had protected the family. I had restored balance. I had ended the cycle of pain Jack created. One night, lying in bed, I thought of everything that had happened. The good, the bad, the wounds, the healing, the revenge, the peace. And a thought came to me, soft and unwavering. Revenge is simply truth given a voice. When silence has lasted too long, I breathed out slowly, feeling years of weight lift from my chest. I had lived a long life filled with love, with loss, with responsibility, and with redemption. And as my eyes closed, I knew one final truth. I did not destroy my brother. I saved the rest of us. And that, in the end, was enough. The truth is this. Some stories end in flames. Some end in forgiveness. Mine ended in silence. Silence I earned. Silence I protected. Silence I built out of the rubble my brother left behind. People believe revenge is about winning. It is not. Revenge is about restoring balance when someone has shattered it for far too long. My brother spent his life taking. From our father. From our mother. From us. From himself. He believed consequences were optional. Until the day the consequences finally arrived wearing my face. I did not punish him. I did not destroy him. I simply let the truth speak. Truth my father spent years gathering. Truth he placed inside a wooden box. Truth he trusted me to deliver. And when I did, the house grew quiet. The family grew steady. The storm finally passed. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. When love has no boundaries, it is not love. It is surrender. And when surrender lasts too long, someone must become the boundary. Someone must say, enough. No more. This ends now. For my family, that someone was me, and I would make the same choice, 1,000 times more, because peace is priceless, and some people will never give you peace until you take away their power to harm you. This was my truth, my burden, my justice, my ending. May whoever hears it find the strength to draw their own line before the storm grows too big to survive. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the weight of this family's fight for peace, I would ask you one thing. Share your voice with us. Like this story so others can find it. Subscribe if you want more real revenge tales told with truth and scars. And leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my place. Your voice keeps this channel alive. Until next time, take care of your peace, protect your boundaries, and remember, some storms you survive by standing your ground.